Welcome to this conversation circle titled Building Momentum, Digital Justice Advocacy Post-WSIS+20. I'm Philip Lee, General Secretary of WACC, and I will be our conversational guide today. The much anticipated World Summit on the Information Society, WSIS+20, took place in Geneva, Switzerland, 7 to 11 July 2025. WSIS+20 was the second review of the outcomes of the original WSIS, held in two phases, Geneva 2003 and Tunis 2005. After a convoluted series of multi-stakeholder consultations in 2023 and 2024, during which many of the exchanges were highly technical and full of jargon, and in the light of the UN's Summit of the Future, its Pact for the Future, and its Global Digital Compact, many analysts still believe that WSIS+20 offered a not-to-be-missed opportunity to put forward a progressive vision of digital and communication justice for all. What came next would have to be structural and holistic, addressing all aspects of the ecosystem, media, digital platforms, data and AI, as well as their governance, architecture, design and application. In the words of the Global Digital Justice Forum, quote, 20 years after the adoption of the Tunis Agenda, the challenge before us is not just to bridge the divides in internet access and information and communication technologies. It is equally about the spectre of digital inequality. The dividends of digital innovation are increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few powerful corporations and countries. Social media platforms have failed to democratize voice, and digital marketplaces have largely benefited just a few players. We must face up to the fact that, contrary to early expectations, the connectivity revolution has not been an equalizer, end quote. We are also witnessing a rise in the weaponizing of technology and online platforms to attack women and girls on the basis of their gender. This violence has no limits or geographical boundaries. It can start online and escalate to physical spaces or vice versa, and it can end in the most extreme forms of violence, including femicide. Despite the protracted consultations and conversations surrounding WSIS+20, or perhaps because of them, the scenario remains complicated, convoluted, and controversial. Talk of human rights in the context of digital justice raises a red flag, and many governments now prefer to talk about information integrity. And there are major obstacles facing issues of accountability, regulation, and financing an equitable digital infrastructure. Nevertheless, as Wolfgang Kleinwächter, one of the original movers and shakers behind WSIS 2003 and 2005, has emphasized, quote, innovative solutions are needed on how to bridge the digital divide, how to promote digital public infrastructure, how to enhance cybersecurity, how to safeguard human rights, how to avoid internet fragmentation, and how to make sure that the AI revolution does not move beyond human control, end quote. To address some of these challenges and opportunities and to put forward bold ideas for collaborative advocacy, we have brought together four panelists. They are Guevarra, Computer Professionals Union from the Philippines, Nandini Chami of IT for Change in India, Douglas Smith from Data Friendly Space in the USA, and Christina Dahl Jensen from DanChurchAid, Denmark. We shall have 2 rounds of questions to which each panelist will have just 3 minutes to respond, speaking from their varied perspectives. After that, we shall pick up questions from the chat function. So we're going to begin with Xian, and the question for each one of them will be the same here, and it is, what is the greatest challenge and opportunity that you see for our global information ecosystem today, and why? Xian, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Philip. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone here. I'm Xian Guevarra, the Secretary General of the Computer Professionals Union. And for me, for this question, the greatest challenge and opportunity is actually two sides of the same coin. It's about power concentration. Right now, the information ecosystem is being captured by a handful of powerful actors, whether states or corporations who control not only infrastructure, but also the narratives that define what's possible. I was very privileged to be part of the delegation of WACC last July in WSIS+20. I was one of the partners there. And there, actually, when we went to WSIS+20 and the AI for Good Summit, could actually feel this tension. Across the hall, AI for Good, there was like showcase of the future of humanity, like what big tech there is right now, like flying cars and everything. But the question is, where are the communities here? Because communities don't even have basic internet access. And that's the disconnect. That's the main issue here. The disconnect is the heart of the problem, innovation without inclusion. But this is also where the opportunity lies. It's the same technologies that concentrate control. There's AI, there's data, there's digital platforms. You can also reimagine this as tools for decentralization and empowerment. If we reclaim them as part of digital commons, if we embed transparency, rights, and community control into how we build and deploy them, we can create a truly democratic digital ecosystem. But that requires confronting uncomfortable truths, colonial legacies in tech development, gender and racial bias in algorithms, and the growing digital divide. As one of the speakers said at WSIS, and I hope they recognize this because they are here today, transformation isn't possible unless you confront colonial, racist, and sexist legacies embedded in the control of information and knowledge. That's actually Philip. Hey, Philip, that was your line. And that line actually stayed with me because it reminds us that technology isn't neutral. And justice won't emerge naturally from innovation. It has to be fought for. So, yeah.
Thank you, Xian, in under 3 minutes. That's wonderful. We're going to move to Nandini and hear a little of the view from India. Nandini.
Hi, I am Nandini and I represent IT for Change, an India-based not-for-profit organization working towards an equitable information society for the Global South. We are also the secretariat of the Network Global Digital Justice Forum. So I want to add to what the previous speaker said, that the biggest challenge of our times is that the decentralized communication affordances of the internet have not led to communicative abundance and democratization of media. And it's very evident that this is a result of the corporate capture of the internet revolution. And contrary to what we thought about like 25 years ago, rather than lead to an explosion of new, smaller journalistic efforts and diversified voices and topics, we have actually seen an era of technology concentration and a lack of media diversity and technological companies entering the media market and controlling the content that circulates on the communication sphere. A study that I was just looking at before the conversation today, and this like verifies what I think we all know instinctively. This is a literature review of 78 studies of what social media has done to media diversity. The study concludes that when you look at platform business model, they intensify metric dependence for news circulation, and this limits investigative depth. And algorithmic intermediation, which is opaque, has a negative effect on trust, and this delegitimizes news circulation. And optimization for virality correlates with polarization and misinformation in the public sphere, with a lot of potential for self-censorship, including the chilling effects that Philip also described earlier today. To add to this, we are also seeing in the age of AI overviews and synthetic media, the death of visual fact, as New York Times columnist Brian Chen put it, where we no longer can believe in the accuracy of video documentation. That was always suspect to begin with, but this AI-generated media has made this problem much worse. And to conclude, I just want to say, considering that so many veterans of the communication rights movement, my heroes actually, are here with us in the call today, I think there's an opportunity for civil society to actually resurrect the communication rights agenda and take it forward through calling for a epistemic rights movement, where the requirement that society should guarantee truthful information and knowledge to all citizens and then help them acquire the critical media literacies and competencies to use these for their own benefit and for public purpose as a whole. We are in a civilizational transformation, and such a demand would be very important for all of us to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini. Doug, we hear a lot from the United States these days, a lot to do with tech and AI. What's your take on the situation?
Yeah, so I'm Doug Smith with Data Friendly Space. I'm the acting CEO, and I have both the opportunity to talk about the perspective of someone who works in the AI community, building platforms, and being from the United States. And so in some ways, I'm speaking from a place of privilege, but I'm also speaking from a perspective that's very clear on the applied use of new technologies like AI and how it is benefiting those of us who are working in humanitarian and response spaces. I would agree the challenge is that lagging access and adoption often creates gaps in skills, and it leaves communities behind. I think that's been true of both when we adopted mobile networks. It's true of when the internet was coming on board. It's that lagging access and adoption that disenfranchises many communities. And that's, I think, one concern that I have is that sometimes those of us who work in and out of the justice movement sometimes are critical to the point of being caught in our own arguments, but maybe not always seeing that the train has left the station and that these new technologies are being used and deployed quite rapidly around the world. And it's something that we should be aware of and probably should think about how it is that we apply. So for instance, there have been earthquakes and terrible storms hitting the Philippines over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Data Friendly Space has been able to use AI and data pulls from multiple places in order to really qualify and quantify which communities are most impacted, and then layer over top of that where pockets of poverty are, in particular islands. And that's been able to really enable responders to target their relief efforts much more quickly and much more comprehensively than in the past. And so I would say the opportunity we have before us is the ability to start breaking down some silos. I think in the humanitarian and the response communities particularly, it allows us to contextualize our responses a lot more fuller. And I think we're able to actually start having a conversation that's not about data stovepipes, where you have human rights conversations and you have humanitarian conversations and agriculture conversations. But new technologies are allowing us to contextualize information across those stovepipes so that when we are investing in response, those responses are much fuller and much better for the communities that they serve. One last thing I'll say is that I do think that communities aren't engaged enough around the use of new tech like AI. And I am impressed with the work of Nesta out of the UK, who have a community initiative that they've been rolling out, and we've worked with them in places like Turkey and the Philippines to engage communities to find out what it is that they need in order to create the best tools that match with those use cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. A lot to think about just in that 3 minutes. Christina, Denmark to some extent has been one of the leaders in concepts of digital justice. What is your view from where you sit?
My name is Christina Dahl Jensen. I represent DanChurchAid, an international Danish NGO working in 19 countries across the humanitarian development nexus. I lead a team or two teams that work in the intersection of innovation, technology, and democracy. And I think from my perspective, if I go up into a little bit of the helicopter, I think that the greatest challenge of today is really that the digital ecosystem has become deeply geopolitically affected and securitized. So if technology was not a tool of power before, it definitely is now, and a tool of power over data and infrastructure standards and influence. So the digital race really shapes who controls the narratives, the markets, and even the civic freedoms. And that is rapidly progressing. So for many in the global south, this really deepens dependency and the digital colonialism. At the same time, from an organization really working closely with human rights defenders, also in some of the very hard to reach areas, we're witnessing a rapidly shrinking civic space, something that we see as a general trend across all the different types of countries we live in or work in, sorry. And this space is shrinking across borders, and human rights defenders are no longer safe even when in exile. And this is because of digital surveillance, online harassments, algorithmic bias, silencing citizens and activists worldwide. So even our general narrative is under attack from different states. And especially women are really affected. And thank you, Philip, for highlighting that in the intro. So DCA did a report on online harassment and censorship of women human rights defenders. And that really showed how vividly across Kenya, Cambodia, and Palestine, for example, women are facing coordinated hate speech, threats, and digital intimidation simply for speaking out on even the simplest things as ordinary support or helplines for women. So I think even in these tensions, there lies enormous opportunity, and the Pact for the Future reminds us that human rights and sustainable development and peace are equally important and mutually reinforcing. And I think the Global Digital Compact also holds potential for holding governments accountable on these processes. I do think there is we need to speak more about the intersection of policies on digital and policies on innovation, because we have a responsibility for what we invent. And many of the repressive tools that we see in the global south, they don't just come out of the US and out of other state-backed sections. It also comes out of Europe. And there's the Draghi report on Europe's how well the market is going in Europe and our competitiveness really emphasizes that innovation should be speeded up. And here we have really a responsibility to intersect with these processes and make sure that the innovation that we create in Europe is actually value-based and grounded in ethics and human rights. So that's also an area that DC is very attentive to. The things that we want to keep our own government, Danish government, accountable for our role in what goes out into the world. So I think I'll leave it at that. There's so much to talk about here.
Great, thank you, Christina. I want to go in a little more depth to some of the things that have been said so far. It was the United Nations that began this process, that initiated a World Summit on the Information Society. I think it was Kofi Annan, but that's immaterial at this stage. It was very much an international process. And there's been great emphasis over the past 5 years on the global nature of what is being discussed. And yet at the same time, as we've already heard from contributors this morning, this devolves downward, as it were, to nations and communities within nations and so on. So I want to delve a little bit more into the idea of these international processes and go back to Xian and ask, do these international processes actually impact communities at the local level in real ways? Or is it a matter of them having to fight for corners of what's happening and then reapply them sort of higher up? What's your view of that?
Okay, so this is actually a tricky question because obviously the answer is yes. but the problem is it's not direct. So for most communities back home, these processes feel very distant. When you say WSIS+20, Global Digital Compact, no one knows what this is. Not farmers, not workers, not even IT professionals. Even me personally, prior to this year, I had no clue whatsoever about WSIS+20, Global Digital Compact. So yeah, these are things that we haven't heard of, yet these decisions are made here. And these actually quietly shape our access to technology, our data rights, and even our freedom of expression online. And for us in the Philippines and many countries in the Asia Pacific, what we're grappling with is digital surveillance, there's disinformation, and then there's also the widening of access gaps. The policies that are being talked about in WSIS+20 and all these other international processes actually enable or restrict those realities. Data governance, platform regulation, AI ethics, these are all discussed at the global level. So even if people don't actually see it, these frameworks trickle down in the form of national laws, digital policies, or infrastructure investments. So the challenge here is there's impact, but it's not felt as empowerment. It feels like an imposition because our communities aren't represented meaningfully in these processes. The outcomes often reflect the priorities of governments and corporations rather than the actual lived realities of users, of workers, and of marginalized groups. That was one of my key takeaways actually in WSIS+20. You could feel that civil society was there. We had our interventions, we had our networks, our side events, but we were still at the margins of the conversation. Most of the people deciding the future of digital cooperation were not the ones living in unstable connections. They're not the ones living with surveillance threats or harassments online. And that disconnect is what is exactly why the impact feels so distant. So to me, the question isn't whether these processes actually impact our communities. They absolutely do, but whether our communities are able to impact these processes in return. That's where the work lies, the bridging the gap between Geneva, okay, what's being talked about at WSIS and the grassroots. For us at CPU, what we do is we translate this into community education and advocacy. We do workshops, we do tech trainings, and policy awareness sessions. If we can make these global conversations understandable and relevant to ordinary people, students, farmers, workers, then the impact becomes mutual, not just one way. Because ultimately, the legitimacy of these global processes depend on how much they serve the people, not how many sessions they hold or how many declarations they pronounce. So yes, they impact us. But what we need to make sure is that we can impact them back.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Xian. I'm in London, UK at the moment, and I know that if I go out on the street and I stop anybody and say, what do you understand by WSIS+20? Well, they might lock me up, I'm not sure, but nobody would know what's going on, what it was about. And worse still, and something we noted when we were in Geneva, is that the media are not really paying too much attention to these international processes, to the WSIS event as such. I mean, we searched in vain for mainstream news coverage of what was happening in Geneva, and it seemed little to none, which is extraordinary. Let's turn back to Nandini and ask a similar question. And it's this: is it possible for civil society to have a meaningful impact on these international processes? And if so, how? It kind of follows up what Xian was saying, but I'm thinking that your situation in India with the Modi government is particularly difficult. And I wonder what you can say about the impact question.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that again, I think it's like a trick question and it's about the reading, because at this moment, I think none of us can really go to the UN expecting for, let's say, public financing to bridge the digital data infrastructure divide at this UN 80 moment when the very multilateral order is under siege and a lot of consensus about what the UN should do. I mean, that itself is up for debate now. At the same time, I think that if we are clear that we treat the UN as any other opportunistic political space that civil society engages with for particular objectives, it is still possible to make meaning out of that and have wins. And I just want to give like two specific examples from the work of IT for Change and allies at Global Digital Justice Forum. So the first point is about the Global Digital Compact. In the lead up to the Global Digital Compact, IT for Change, with numerous other partners at the Global Digital Justice Forum, engaged multiple times about broadening the idea of human rights beyond user rights. And in the GDC statement, we now have a recognition that human rights extends to the whole technology life cycle. And why is this statement important? Because once you don't talk in the formation of all rights offline or rights online, and instead use a life cycle approach, it gives us room to talk about economic, social, cultural rights of affected communities in data and AI value chains, and the rights of those who are disenfranchised by the welfare state, like, for example, beneficiaries of Aadhaar who may not be getting their welfare entitlements. They would not be internet users, but there is data discrimination and denial of entitlements because of a digital welfare system. It gives us the opening to talk about issues like that. This is my first point. The second point is about the fact that we see that digital policy is fragmented and there are numerous forum shopping opportunities that are taken advantage of by the powerful, such as data governance being converted into a trade issue instead of treating it as a enhanced cooperation or a digital cooperation policy matter. I think that the UN CSTD working group on data governance that was established through the Global Digital Compact gives us some opening to talk about data flows in relation to the issue of equitable development. We don't know what will come out of this, but still these openings or wedges for change are all that we can hope for as civil society. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nandini. Over to Doug. Is there a general tech sector view of these international processes? I mean, does Silicon Valley care less what happens at the international level? Are they paying any attention to WSIS 20, or do they just go their own sweet way regardless?
Yeah, I think they pretty much go their own sweet way regardless, to be honest. In part is because governments are always trying to catch up. And the conversations that are happening in those types of forums tend to be reactive, trying to put the genie back in the bottle. And even people working in, the justice sector, trying to raise these concerns from the ground up, tend to be having conversations about things that have already happened. And so what would probably be much better is to look down the road at emerging tech that's 4 or 5 years out and begin to have a broader conversation about what that means as a way of pulling in the current situation into the broader conversation. I mean, the reality is that you will find that there are corporate presences at events like that. They might participate in the compacts. They are concerned about, obviously, global policies. But the reality is, by the time those policies get minted, the technology has just kind of moved on. It's moving very, very quickly. And unfortunately, that model of 20th century reactive working really isn't going to work in a 21st century reality.
Thank you. Just to take it a little bit further, if you would. I mean, the spectre of AI is on everybody's mind, of course. And now yesterday I was reading that there's quantum AI, which is the speed, the phenomenal speed at which AI could be used if they're able to develop it in some ways. You're saying that that is where at the moment we need to intervene as civil society and have a voice in the development and application of new technologies?
That's exactly, actually, with quantum computing is exactly what I would suggest. On this call, no doubt there are climate justice activists who are concerned about the energy use that AI requires. I think that's a valid conversation to have. I think if you look at the numbers over the last 3 years, you'll see a dramatic decrease in the amount of energy required to provide AI computations, but it's still quite big, and we're only going to use more and more of it. We can have that climate justice conversation about AI today, but there's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do to put the genie back in the bottle. But being able to talk about quantum computing, which will come online in 4, 5, 8 years, doing that now actually could have a much bigger impact, because there's a lot of questions we haven't answered yet about the amount of power and electricity it's going to take and the environment in order to keep those quantum computers stable. That's the conversation that groups like this should be having to get ahead of where the industry is headed.
Thank you, Doug. Over to Christina. My question here says, what are your top 2 takeaways from these international processes that we as digital justice advocates need to address? Maybe more than 2. I mean, I'm sure there's a raft of things that need to be done, but perhaps you could tell us about that.
Absolutely. But first, please let me say, Doug, I am so much in agreement on this question of quantum, and let's try to look just a little bit into the future and see what's coming towards us, because I think that is really the opportunity we have. And it links to my point that when we look at these processes in general, we're never first invitee to the table, right? So years back when it was still Twitter and not X, it was actually just in those weeks where Twitter turned into X for several reasons. I was in conversation with one of the policy directors, and he was talking about his invite to defining what was going to be in the Global Digital Compact. And I had never heard about it in any civil society layers. I was like, what? Digital Global Compact? What's that? What's that? And he was like, yeah, we've been talking about it for ages. And he was an extremely nice person, but it really was that we're not the first to be invited to those political conversations. And that's the reality also that spins out into these processes. So I think yet when you say we really need to link local to global, I think that falls upon us, because what happens in these processes is that there's a lot of geopolitical issues that need to go on. And even though that the Pact for the Future calls for bold, ambitious, and decisive steps to bridge divides, we know that it falls upon civil society, because the institutions that need to lift this are unable. And I would just like to highlight a piece of innovation work that we've done with partners in Palestine on creating a violence tracker based on a large language model. And I think we're very good at creating solutions from bottom up and actually giving local communities and local partners the right tools. What we're really bad at is actually scaling those tools so that they have the impact to be able to connect up into the processes that are defining. And even though, both the Pact of the Future, the WSIS, are great frameworks, and they also have their faults. I think we need to be better at bridging that divide, actually, as civil society, and helping that gap, because local communities will never sit at the table at these processes, and we need to figure out how to do that in a different way, because right now we're not getting the access, and we're not getting access early enough into the conversations. So so I think that's also the challenge back to the community of how can we also interact differently with some of these processes and push in new directions.
Christina, can you just say a little bit more? I can see Xian nodding vigorously there as he's in agreement with what you're saying, and I'm sure we all are. But how do we just sit back and wait for the UN process to invite people and say, "Oh, come and have a chat, and we'll take a few notes"? How do we actually start from the bottom up and say, "Look, you guys, we want to be heard, and you're going to listen"?
I think we do lots of great stuff. Really knocking on the doors, lots of, so DCA on the climate side does a lot of silent advocacy. We're very, very deeply involved in a lot of the negotiations that are going on. And I think that space, we can take that space and be a part of that space. But I also think that if we are to lift the local community's needs up into something that is relevant, I also think we need to show, don't tell kind of thing. That I think lead by example, create the systems that local communities are looking for, make sure that they are lifted up into this is the model to be able to do that. So I think it's we can do better in linking, and I think technology will actually help us to be able to do that. And Ian, I would be so interested in hearing your perspective from a Philippine local community perspective also.
Well, let's just go to Ian just briefly on that before we go and see if there have been questions in the chat, which I'm sure there have. Ian, do you want to just pick up on Christina's remark there?
Oh, I just love the idea of like, actually not waiting for like UN to actually invite us, because that's not going to happen. Even at the WSIS, CSO participation there is very minimal, and yet there's all this talk about multi-stakeholderism, but where are the people? Where are the local communities? And for me, like our work at CPU, that's what we're trying to do. That's why I was like nodding very vigorously, because like what we actually need to do is we need to learn from the masses. What do they think about these issues on AI? What's the issue on data privacy? All these things, as opposed to like it being just imposed on them. For example, I had a talk yesterday with the trade unions here in the Philippines, and many of them have questions about AI and the algorithm of the platforms that they're using, like Grab, Food Panda. But basically, these are things that are platforms that they're working on. So they're asking us like, what do they mean by this algorithm? They say there's a glitch, that's why I'm not getting paid. So these are some of the exploitations that's actually happening on the ground, yet people have no, they have no say on these things. So I think coming from an environmental activist perspective as well, so just a quick background, before I came into the CPU, the digital rights advocacy, I was more focused on environmental rights. So WSIS for me was like COP, okay? So the Conference of Parties, where they talk about the Paris Agreement, all these climate change things. And for me, what I think is missing in the digital rights space is that more militant activism. Because like at this point, we are being exploited, the corporations and the countries that are taking control of our digital spaces are doing lots of things, and yet we have no say about all of these. Our future, we have no say about it. So the question is, when do we rise up? When do we say to them, okay, stop? All these things shouldn't be happening just inside all these closed door meetings. We need to take part in this conversation. So yeah, I think we need to be more of like more militant in one way or another, and not just like sticking to our own keyboards and such. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Ian. Now, my colleague Lorenzo Vargas has been keeping an eye on the chat. I just want to go over to him and ask what questions have come up there, which we can either pose to all the panelists or if it perhaps have been directed at one or other of you. Lorenzo, what's happening?
Thank you, Philip. Perhaps a first question will be around gender-based violence. This is a question coming to us from a friend Tasneem in Pakistan. Are there any solutions that are emerging in your different contexts to gender-based violence, things that you could highlight, especially in a context marked by AI?
Okay, Nandini, that sounds like something you might want to address. Is it something you just want to say a little about?
Yeah, I just, can I respond now or should we take more questions? Yeah,
Let's
okay.
briefly do that.
I think that when it comes to addressing gender-based violence in the context of AI-generated content, especially, even in countries such as India, there is recognition that the older way of looking at platforms as neutral conduits, that cannot really work. And we must have newer ways of mapping liability regimes on for AI-generated content. I also think that in this regard, the EU's proposal about overturning product fault in imagining AI liability and what is done with it, what is done with AI products and services is a very interesting direction to go, though that is not yet a law yet in the European Union. My final point is that when you look at like the question of synthetic media generated content, the problem is also one of algorithmic virality. So unless we change the social media model and manage to put brakes on virality, the question of gender-based violence that will continue to plague us for a long time, and we need to take urgent action on this.
Thanks, Nandini. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. So back to Lorenzo. What else has come up, please?
Thank you, Philip. Another question is around extractivism. Of course, as we all know, the AI revolution and in general digital technologies rely on water and minerals and extraction of things from the earth. How is that being seen in your different contexts? And I'm actually looking at DOG in particular because you're in working with industry partners. How are they seeing this? Or do they see this as a major issue? And perhaps in Europe, when it comes to regulation, how are they looking at this?
So you're speaking primarily of physical elements extraction. So as I said earlier, I think that is an important conversation, particularly as we see data centers show up in non Western countries. When we start seeing data centers popping up in throughout Africa, for instance, there is no doubt going to be an important conversation about extractivism at that point. But I would say that the industries themselves are, it appears to me, working very, very rapidly in order to make those processes more efficient. And once again, I think the conversation we should be having isn't on the train that's going down the track, trying to become more efficient. And, let's all acknowledge that there is a lot of extractive power dynamic there. But the conversation we should have is really around the next gen technology as a way of addressing that before the genie gets out of the bottle. And then as a point of strategy, trying to incorporate the existing situation at the same time. I think it's going to be very difficult to react and catch up with the trends at this stage.
Thanks, Doug. Christina, do you want to add a European perspective to that question?
From a European perspective, it's a lot of different countries in Europe. I would actually rather take it to Kenya because I think there's some both interesting research coming out of Kenya right now on this question, but also a very distinct anger from the younger generation on how they have been exploited. On both on the physical extraction part, but also on the human extraction part. So how content moderators have been exploited and the larger ecosystem of that. So I think we should look towards the African continent to really see the consequences. And as an organization working both in Congo and in CAR, I think it says without too many words that this is something that we need to keep talking about because it has very, very real consequences and it drags out wars to the never end.
Thanks, Christina. Time for one more question. Lorenzo, do you have another up your sleeve?
Yes. One coming from a friend Xian in Ireland. Given the complexity of all these issues and given how fragmented all these different stakeholders are, how can we raise awareness to bring in different actors who usually don't really understand or are up to date with all this digital transformation issues like trade unions, local activists, climate change activists, people from other civil society sectors who are not connected to digital rights and to communication rights?
Thank you. Perhaps we could try Xian on that. He's already alluded to it in his earlier response.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Philip, and thanks, Lorenzo. So basically, digital rights issues they're not going to care at all about this. Let's be honest, let's be real. This is not a gut issue. This is not something that people in the community, they would talk about on a day-to-day basis. But what we need to do is we actually need to learn what their problems are and then link and raise it to digital rights and digital justice. For example, if you're talking about trade unions, like for example, what I mentioned earlier is that they are not getting paid enough, okay, and they don't know why, okay? But then later on, if we introduce to them the idea of platform governance, of AI ethics, all these things, for example, there are also people here in the Philippines that work for international companies and they're being exploited. And if they understand what digital rights is, and it's actually an extension of your human rights in the digital space, they would understand it better. And since there's that understanding, and it's now connected to their gut issue, which is, salary, food, wages, all these things, they would now care about digital rights. They will say, okay, I need to fight for digital rights and digital justice now. For example, if you want to talk to a climate change activist, you can just tell them, okay, you want to save planet Earth. AI is, consuming so much energy. We're not saying AI is bad, but if we don't talk about AI governance, then of course the planet would die. Okay, what Doug was mentioning earlier, it's such a great thing. Instead of just looking at what's happening now, we look to the future. Okay, let's be real. Are we gonna reach like 1.5 degrees, or we're gonna reach more? Okay, if we talk about all these things, the net zero idea that COP is talking about, we can't talk about those things without looking at the future. So if we talk about quantum computing right now, okay, and think about, okay, what is quantum computing? What's quantum AI? How should it look like in the future that it's not going to destroy the environment? That's how climate activists, want to chime in, and they want to say, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that. That's how we all can link and connect to one another. It's linking and raising, finding what inspires them, or, it's their gut issue, and then we connect that to digital rights.
Great. Thank you, Xian. Okay, we just have time for 2 minutes each amongst the panelists to just, in summary form, as it were, answer this question. What is the most important positive change we want to see in our digital landscape? And what is one action we should take to move in that direction? And perhaps I can begin with Christina. Oh, I've got Doug on the screen. Let's begin with Doug. Thank you. Doug.
I'm sorry, could you frame that a little?
You want me to reframe it in an answerable question? What do you see as the most important positive change that we want to see in the digital landscape? And what one action, what single action would best move us in that direction?
I think the most positive thing is that we have the ability to start connecting stovepipes and using the technology in a way that benefits communities, to be quite frank. I don't want to discount the concerns that we have around justice issues. I think the gender issues and climate issues are dominant. But the opportunity ahead of us is to work with foundations like the Red Dot Foundation. They work in gender-based violence. They have 86,000 reports of gender-based violence from 21 countries around the world. How is it that we can use systems that allow us to take those more than 80,000 reports and start doing real analysis to get at the heart of what's happening in the background of gender-based violence in order to stop it before it happens, so that we're not just being reactive? So for me, that is the opportunity, and the way we get involved in that is it to quiet our voices about our concerns and our critique, but at the same time begin to leverage new tech in a way that benefits the communities in which we are most interested in.
Great, thank you, Doug. Christina, over to you.
I think what gives me, because I'm quite a tech pessimist, right? So much you might hear, but what really gives me hope is actually that I see so many local communities, the younger generation, really embracing technology and taking ownership of creating solutions that fit their context, and taking independence and in that, and I think that is really gonna shift. I think that in in connection to the general shifts that there are right now in the humanitarian development sector is going to be immensely important. And then my pessimism will say at the same time, we have a big train of quantum coming towards us and we have no clue how we're going to deal with it. So let's talk more about that.
Okay, we'll have another conversation on there. Thank you. Xian, your view.
Okay. So for me, if I want to talk about one positive change I want to see in our digital landscape, it's basically make technology serve the people, not profit, not power, but actually people. That means a digital world built on justice, rights, and care, not extraction, surveillance, and inequality. World where access to the internet is not a privilege, but it's an actual right. Where data is not a weapon, and where digital innovation uplifts communities rather than leaving them behind. So one action to move to that direction, it's basically to organize across movements, across borders, and across sectors. We can't leave the future of technology to governments or corporations alone. We need to build the people's movement for digital justice, where technologists, activists, educators, and communities come together to reclaim our collective digital future. So that means supporting open and community-owned technologies, educating our communities about their digital rights, holding our governments accountable in global forums, and connecting the digital advocacy with broader struggles for social, environmental, and economic justice. Because digital justice isn't just about the internet, it's about power, dignity, and democracy in the digital age. If we can align technology with those values, we won't just have better tools, we'll have a better world. Because the future of digital justice shouldn't begin in just Geneva. It shouldn't just stay in Geneva or in Silicon Valley, but in every community that dares to imagine technology as a tool for liberation.
That's very much the mantra of the original WSIS in 2003, 2005, people-centered inclusivity. Nandini, over to you.
Yes, just to add to what has been so beautifully said, I think that we all recognize the urgent work before us to claim the trajectories of the digital revolution back from the jaws of capitalism. I think we all recognize that. So it seems like an impossible task, but it actually isn't, because we have precedents before us. Just like what the environmental movement and ecological justice movement succeeded in doing in the 70s, 80s, leading up to the Rio Declaration, I think there is a moment here for us as digital rights and communication rights activists to demonstrate that AI is just a normal technology. We have seen the problems of technology assessment and forecast before. We know how to use the precautionary principle and reverse red lines and the baselines for equity and justice we want in the tech revolution. And this work of engaging with everyone to show how the digital is not something in hyperspace, but it has deep material and real life footprints and impacts. That's something I think we should all be doing in our communities and collectively.
Thank you, Nandini. So it's impossible to summarize this conversation. There's so many complexities, so many layers. As you probably are aware, many of you on this call at least, the zero draft of the outcomes of the WSIS+20 process is going before the UN in mid-December of this year. But that's not really the point. The point is, what do people do about it in 2026 and onwards? How can we collectively act for the good? I mean, some of the things that have come out in this conversation, technology and artificial intelligence for good. What does that mean? How does that play out? Where are the communities? How do we address the disconnect between communities at that level? Innovation without inclusion, we obviously don't want that. That key word of inclusion and human dignity. The concept of digital colonialism was raised, which is being tackled from different directions. The technology, of course, is not neutral. It's a tool of power, one of our speakers said. And then there's the whole corporate capture of the internet revolution and the new technologies that are coming out of what's sometimes referred to as digitality. So accessibility, justice, human dignity, contextualizing responses to the WSIS, and then having a voice in both the development and the deployment of new technologies, and specifically, of course, further developments in artificial intelligence and now quantum AI. And those key words are urged by Xian, more militant activism. That's great. I'm sure we can all find ways of doing that at different levels and in different locations. I'd like to thank each of our panelists for their insights and challenges to all of us. Thank you, everybody that's taken part in this conversation, for your interest and commitment to digital justice advocacy. Please continue the conversation on WACC social media channels and with others in your communities. If you're not yet subscribed, we invite you to sign up for our free e-newsletter, which is called The Hub, and you can find details of that on our website. And there's around the world to build momentum and to advocate for a digitally just future. Thank you, and have a very good rest of your day.